Okay, are we ready to start? Great. Hello, welcome everyone. This is a reflection on my personal failures when implementing agile transformations. As you can see, I'm a leader in transformational failure, and as Einstein so eloquently put it, a person who never made a mistake never tried anything new. And I've tried many different things to overcome my failures, those transformational failures. And today I'm going to share some of those reflections and stories. I run the Change Centre of Excellence for NatWest Group, and our team goal is to support the bank in serving our customers and communities with simple and intuitive solutions that continually improve our ability to turn ideas into value. And we can be summed up by a kind of a hashtag, simple, safe and smart. And I'm joined today by Katrina Warren, our capability manager, who leads on many of the adoption activities we undertake as we transform, and she'll be sharing some of those experiences with us today. Now, I am going to shamelessly plug a book, this one, Sooner, Safer, Happier by John Smart. Not because I have any financial interest in it, but because John Smart came to speak to us as a group about agile at scale transformation. And it was as if he'd taken my life experience from the last 20 years and distilled it into a number of patterns and anti-patterns for change. And it was very powerful. I can highly recommend it. And so the message I want you to take away from today, directly from the mouth of John and backed up by my experience, is that impediments are not the blocker to realizing value. They are actually the pathway to realizing value. And during the session, we're going to share with you 3 key themes that represent my headline failures, 6 key lessons that have emerged from those failures, and I'm going to address 5 elephants in the room. And my challenge to you in the next 30 minutes is test everything I say. Does it make sense? Does it relate to your experience? Can you apply the learning in your context? So buckle down. I'm going to bare my soul and demonstrate how to have the resilience of a boxer as you find the path to success. So what's the first headline failure? You have to know your people so you can focus on objectives. And let me explain that. Have you ever been part of a kind of a transformation, any kind of change transformation? You're told how you're going to change, the transformation you're going to go through. You have to be a scrum master. You have to adopt stand-ups. You have to learn new language like velocity and story points. It's typically enacted via a big program of work where you and your colleagues will magically transform into these beautiful, agile butterflies. It's top down and it's implemented with some kind of big bang. And the problem with this approach, and it's one that I've implemented myself, is that this doesn't apply an agile mindset to an agile transformation. In fact, it ignores some very basic human needs and results in a really visceral human emotional response. So the first one, not surprisingly, is that mandated change triggers fear and resistance in the people affected. They're worried about the new ways of working, the uncertainty about the future, the fear of failure, the loss of control, the change fatigue. There are so many things that come up as fears within people. And changes in this kind of imposed and forced approach trigger a survival instinct, and it leads at the very best to resistance, and at the worst to a kind of large-scale emotional fallout. Now, the second thing that happens is people have a tendency to prefer avoiding loss rather than gains of a similar value. So typically thought of in an economic sense, you're offered a trial period and you use the new functionality for a period of time. And the goal is to have you embrace that as your new status quo. And when you do, you then resist losing that functionality and you're prepared to pay for it. It's a marketing ploy used all the time. Well, this behavioral trait emerges in change activity as well. We see resistance and then the desire to maintain the status quo rather than embracing the possibility that there's a new benefit from the change. And then the third thing that happens on top of this fear, resistance, and loss aversion is forcing change on people creates a situation where they feel helpless. And if you go through enough change, it becomes a learned helplessness. So I conducted an experiment when I was studying for my bachelor's degree. This was all about flies. If you put a fly in a jar and you seal the jar, then the fly flies around bumping into the walls and the ceiling. Eventually, it learns that there's a lid and it can't get out. So it carries on flying around, but it never attempts to go up to the ceiling and get out of the jar. Then you can take the lid off the jar and the fly stays in the jar. Still flies around, but it doesn't fly up. The only way to get the fly out is to agitate the jar and tip it up, which makes the fly uncomfortable, and then it attempts to get away and it flies out of the lid. And this is called learned helplessness. And people, when going through change, they go through the same process. They're waiting for the next instruction. They're waiting to find out if they have a job. Okay, they become frozen and helpless in the face of that imposed change. So what do we do about this fear and resistance and compelling that makes people feel helpless? There's a chap called Daniel Pink, and he's written a book called Drive, The Surprising Truth About What Motivates Us. And he talks about the drivers for achieving better outcomes being autonomy, mastery, and purpose. So he believes the secret to high performance in today's society and the satisfaction that comes from that is the deeply human need to direct our own lives, our autonomy, to learn and create new things, mastery, and to do better by ourselves and the world around us, our purpose. They are our internal motivators. So when someone hears they're going through an imposed change, there's a lack of autonomy. You have to do this. And there's a lack of mastery because you're a beginner again. After a long career learning new language and jargon and ceremonies, and because you have to do it. And sometimes that internal mastery motivator, which is often about learning new things, is lost because the learning is imposed and it's outside of your control. And then if the justification for the change, the reason you're doing it, is about the company creating efficiencies, and those efficiencies result in job losses, then you actually take away people's purpose as well. So here's the elephant in the room for our first failure. We are smart enough to know the difference between an imposed change for improving value outcomes for customers and one that's really about efficiencies. Why would I want to lose my job, my position, my respect, just to make the company more money next year when I'm not in it? So we start our journey to agility by removing all of the internal motivators that are key to supporting the change. We force people to adopt Agile instead of inviting them to adopt Agile. My point is, doing Agile to people doesn't make you agile. It leads to fear, it leads to resistance, it's not empowering. So what do we do? So our goal is about better outcomes, right? It's about improving the value proposition to the bank and to our customers. So that should be our focus. And sometimes, yes, you have to change the org structure and the roles and the new ways of working. But if these need to be part of the transformation, we should clearly separate the activity to do that and the efficiency drive that comes from it from the, and we should aim to do it as quickly as we possibly can so that we limit the impact of that transformational org structure change on the feelings of loss of security and the feelings of fear and the feelings of helplessness. So we should recognize that that kind of transformation is only the very first step in being agile. It's not the transformation itself. So it removes some organizational impediments, but only sets you up to start the journey. And depending on how you did that transformation, you may have gone backwards with your employees before you can go forwards again. Now, we want to give people back their internal motivators as soon as we possibly can. So we should put the majority of our leadership activity into the process of empowering people to find ways to improve the outcomes that they deliver. And to do that as soon as we can after that initial structure change has happened. So in the kind of language of climbing, we don't want to create spectators who kind of stand helplessly at the foot of the mountain and look up. We want to create people who will strive to conquer the mountain, sometimes leading, sometimes following, but always focused on the outcome, getting to the top of the mountain. We want to create an environment where people choose to be the climbers, not the spectators. And we need leaders who will role model and support their teams as they do that. So what does that really mean in summary with my failure? It's this: if you know your people, if you know the possibility of fear and loss aversion and learned helplessness up front, then knowing that up front helps you to minimize the impact of it before you even start. And if you know your people, knowing they need autonomy and mastery and purpose, then that leads you to build support mechanisms that do exactly that as you start your true transformation.
So know your people and know and provide the support that they need. Provide role-specific support material to give clarity and understanding of the outcomes each role is designed to deliver. Enable those climbers. Give the information clearly to free the minds for delivery. Individuals changing roles have more than enough to get their heads around without questioning what their new role is supposed to deliver. Help them understand the outcomes expected by role and then unearth the internal motivators that sit within. A program manager with a team of 20 transitioning to a Scrum Master role with no direct reports is going to go through a sizable learning curve. Moving from a hierarchical structure to servant leadership, it's a major shift and it's full of fear. Start with the teams with the least hierarchy. Capture their successes. Bring in the communities of practice and the communities of interest early. Find a success story and shout it from the rooftops and enable sharing of experiments and outcomes. Show everyone that they can play to their internal motivators. Let them feel their control, demonstrating how well they have done and how that plays to the outcome. Provide those guardrails and move to trust and autonomy, giving power to the teams to experiment, learn and improve. We failed fast and we learned quickly, picking up the pieces of confusion and frustration with a group of 16 program managers who were transitioning to release train managers. And applying those learnings, we supported the group by providing role profiles to give clarity of expected outputs, day in the life examples to bring not just their role to life, but also the roles they would be interacting with, roadmaps depicting ceremonies and interactions. We enabled scaled Agile learning as a cohort and supported them to set up their own community of practice. This group then flourished. They shared and they learned together. They climbed. And once they climbed to the top, they threw down those guide ropes and supported new climbers. And boy, did they feel good. Enable the climbers.
Excuse me. So on to our second failure. Bigger is definitely not better. The bigger the transformation, the bigger the change curve, and the bigger the change curve, the higher the risk to your success. So let me share another one of my kind of aha moments. In this case, I was studying for my master's degree in business transformation. I'm getting old now. This was back in the 1990s. And it was the first time I was introduced to the grief curve. So this idea that when you suffer a loss, there are typical stages that we go through as human beings: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. We might experience them in slightly different orders, but we typically experience them all. So when we're faced with a change at work, the human reaction to this is very similar. If you've ever had the misfortune of being made redundant, as I have, then you'll know what I'm talking about. there's a peak of emotion that takes the form of head in the sand denial. This can't be happening to me. And then there's anger as we understand the truth. How dare they do that to me? And then a kind of a dip as we realize that we need to change. Our life is not the same anymore. Learning anxiety as the new situation emerges. And then a slow climbing out of the hole, if you like, the depression we've been in, until we have acceptance of our new way of working and we build mastery for that new normal. So the bigger the intended change curve from your transformation, the bigger the emotional impact on your staff, and the deeper this S curve of denial, anger, bargaining, and depression lasts, and the more support every single person needs to go through it and to emerge from it successfully. And this is important because leaders often only think in terms of the roles and process changes they're imposing. The program is over when it's over. The truth is, these kind of programs create emotional scars, and the healing, right, the move back towards colleague respect and trust and willingness to do better can take months, and it can even take years as each person overcomes their unique and personal response to that change crisis. Now, just when you think that's a big enough challenge, there's another elephant in the room, okay? Finance, audit, risk, procurement, HR, they're often not seen as part of an agile transformation. They're an afterthought. They're at best one lens of the overall work plan. So this is where we have to come together as leaders, have to bring our middle management and our safety colleagues together to work to alleviate the impediments to value so they're no longer the next biggest constraint. So let me give you an example. We're unlikely to ever do a really big bang change to our controls environment. It's too risky. But we are prepared to look at a discipline like design or testing, or to look at a process like investment funding, to identify and experiment with replacing controls, and as these are validated, to scale them across the organization. Now, I've talked previously about some of the things that we've achieved whilst doing that, and one good example of that is how our finance colleagues combined the investment budget process, which was annual, with the funding approval process, which was typically monthly. And they took two sets of controls, two sets of governance, and they made them one. The consequence of this was faster approval of investment funding at an earlier point in the year, and I was able to fast track the setup of those programs in order for us to start work on a quicker basis. Now, when I say fast track and on a quicker basis, I'm talking about an improvement of around 5 to 7 months in the time that it took us to stand up and commence a program. A substantial improvement just by bringing together practitioners in a multidisciplinary team, looking at a specific impediment, in this case, funding, and recognizing that that impediment was a blocker to value, and was not a blocker to value, sorry, but was the pathway to value. We had to address the impediment to realize the pathway to value. And we needed everyone, agile practitioners, functional representatives, and safety colleagues all working together. So what's the lesson here? The lesson here is start small, identify a small change, a small slice of value, an impediment, one where your risk appetite allows you to test and fail and learn quickly, and allows you to get to value quickly utilizing a multidisciplinary team. Now, even then, we made a mistake, okay? We made some great successes in removing those impediments with a multidisciplinary team. And we focused very particularly at a team level. How could we help teams to become more agile? And so what we did was we scaled horizontally at a team level. And we lost the opportunity to bring our leaders on the journey with us. In fact, we ended up making incremental improvements to how the teams operate, but we left them just as frustrated as it had been before we made the change, because of the external processes and governance imposed on them. We failed to realize the agile transformation we wanted. So what do? You have to engage with all leaders across a vertical slice of the organization and make that work for everything. Your delivery process, your control process, your risk process, your funding process, your resource process. You've got to bring the team, your middle managers, your senior managers, your safety colleagues, your risk and audit, etc., all learning together, all failing together, all solving problems together. And when you have a solution that works for that whole vertical slice, top to bottom in the organization, you can then scale that sidewards. And the scaling vertically lets you nurture change. It allows your leadership to see the benefit, and it allows them to act on their own accord almost immediately afterwards, because they want to scale that for the benefit that it brings. Okay, so the learning here from this kind of bigger is not better failure is that you can be simple and you can be safe and you can be smart. Okay, bigger is not necessarily better when it comes to agile work delivery, and bigger is not better when it comes to building a learning and agile driven culture as well.
So bigger is not better, and the same goes for learning. We decided diversity and breadth of coaching experience and knowledge would be key to success. So we went big and we hired experienced agile coaches, all with different learning paths and backgrounds, and we dropped them into some business areas and said, go do. Great, you say, good upfront investment in coaching our people. Well, here's the thing. These guys all had differing ways of delivering agile ways of working, different methods, tools, practices, experiences, and advice. The fundamentals may have been the same, but at the very start of the agile journey, moving prescriptive roles to freer thought and application, the vast universe of agile was simply too much. So as this resource moved around and people talked and shared their experiences of their coaching and how they were working, confusion reigned. As we all know, there's no one prescriptive way to be agile. The confidence that we wanted to instill was switched to confusion, and the inquisitive minds began questioning their learning rather than questioning themselves on the best way to realize the value. So we took one step forward and 110 steps back. We went big, and it wasn't better. We should have gone small. It's all well and good pushing empowerment and freedom of thought once a consistent base knowledge is in place, but to commonality, it can create chaos. So create those learning pathways by role, by technique and deliverable. Provide different formats to attract different learning preferences, from individual learning to virtual group classes, from books to animations, webinars and quizzes. And consider this. We default to training in role silos, and that's great for a depth of learning at role level and a fantastic precursor to role changes and role-based communities of practice. But what would our results look like if we also trained in teams, multidiscipline, with leaders supporting the class? When everyone has the full picture, everyone can recognize how they contribute to it. How powerfully safe, simple, and smart would that be?
And so on to our kind of third and final agile learning. We're not all the same size. In fact, we are all unique. And so straight to another elephant in the room. I'm sure you've heard projects are bad, agile is good. Doing stage gates slows us down. Doing agile ceremonies speeds us up. Unfortunately, there's no silver bullet for enterprise-wide agility. I have seen poorly executed agile teams delivering slower than highly effective traditional project teams led by a project manager with an agile mindset. So your structure, your environment, your processes, your leaders with their leadership culture, you are unique. The idea that one size fits all across an enterprise the size of NatWest Group has just been proven not to be true in practice. So I'd like you to consider a couple of things. If your business context is unique and diverse, then the idea that everyone will move to a single, new and agile way of working probably isn't true. So what we wanted to do to address this was create a framework that could adapt to context, a range of options, a range of practices, a range of techniques. We did need to lay out the key prescriptive elements, but we also needed to provide enough autonomy that teams and platforms and customer journeys could inspect and adapt within their local context. In other words, we didn't need a rigid one-size-fits-all change framework. We needed a minimum viable framework. The second thing to consider is if your leadership culture is unique, then you probably have multiple different behavioral norms. So when we as leaders, we reward, we punish, we communicate our priorities, and in this process, we create a culture around ourselves. And there are many leaders with many cultures in a single organization. Now, if your leadership culture naturally works against an agile, autonomous way of working with guardrails that allow people to make decisions locally, you're never going to succeed until that changes. And I'm not talking about running a one-size-fits-all leadership development program. I'm talking about taking the time to understand your unique leadership cultures, plural, and helping each individual leader find a path to new behavior that helps their team succeed. And that is one of the reasons we talk about starting small and learning fast and then scaling vertically, so that you can take leaders on the journey with you and find a unique context for them. So if you want to succeed in a change to an agile way of working, or if you want to grow and improve and mature your agile ways of working in your unique and diverse environment, then you need to invite people to participate, to create colleague and leadership pull for those changes. John Smart in his book calls it inviting over inflicting. So we need to give confidence to our leaders that the new way of working will make them more successful than the old way of working. And to do that, we have to provide some clarity around what teams can do and what they can't do when working autonomously. That is guardrails within your risk appetite. So behavioral guardrails, guardrails around experimentation, guardrails around your funding and resource management processes, guardrails around reporting and the minimum standards for governance. John Smart, again, he talks about this. He says, think of guardrails as the thing that you impose, and then the space between the guardrails is your opportunity to invite teams to continuously improve. Now, I can't tell you how much space to put between your guardrails, but I can say that over time, as teams and leaders build respect and trust for each other, you find that those guardrails can expand. So the learning here is be aware of your diverse culture. Be revolutionary in your agile transformation, but do it in an evolutionary way. So that you work within the change appetite of your colleagues and the risk appetite of your leaders. Be the person who creates an environment where you're inviting the organization to change. Don't be the person that forces change on people.
So invite, don't inflict, by creating events that play to everyone's internal motivators. Create a playbook and a calendar of events attracting people at all stages of their agile journey to attend, participate and enjoy. People learn more in an entertained state of mind. So with communities of practice, find ways to attract them, invite. Don't get trapped into inflicting, making communities of practice more like show and tells, designed and delivered by a central function. Avoid people turning off when tuning in. And don't underestimate the effort that this takes. Running one a month takes time. Running half a dozen needs support. And if you can find that support from the communities themselves, you'll also find your agendas. Not only all the successes that they need to and want to share, but also the highly valuable struggles people and teams are facing into. You'll identify where to focus your attentions, what is working and what isn't, what needs celebrating, and what needs changing. Who can make that change? Invite them into the conversation. They can't change what they don't know about. You often find that the middle managers and the teams have identified the impediments and can see the path to success, but experience blockers to change at leadership level. A real success story from NatWest came when we linked our communities of practice to our pool wall. Do you remember Amazon's Grand Tour? Well, in the UK, the programme before the Grand Tour was called Jeremy Clarkson's Top Gear, and they had a cool wall. We replicated this in the office and then ultimately virtually, a large space with 3 columns, sub-zero, cool and uncool. People then popped a post-it note with their content or findings onto the appropriate column. The cool wall attracted a lot of attention. It was highly visible to all. Some fixes were within our gift, and as soon as the relevant person or team understood the impact of the impediment, a fix was applied. However, the big win was with our leaders. They would look as they passed and address the post-it notes. Wow, did things change quickly? Offer everyone the freedom to participate and the variety to be interested. This stimulates creative thinking. Bring them with you and utilize their experience and experiments to create the shared learning content. These sessions are at their most successful and valuable when organised and delivered by the communities themselves. Identify that core group to get started, support them, and give them room to grow organically. Invite. Broaden horizons with external speakers, book clubs and simulation games, and don't forget those leaders. Bring them along on their team's journeys. Be the inviter, not the inflictor.
So in summary, as we close out, what should you take away? If there's no Agile excellence at the leadership level, there can never be effective Agile excellence within your delivery teams. So this means know your people and what motivates them. Start with a why, by all means, give them the case for change, but incentivize them to change based on improving outcomes. Empower them with some very clear guardrails. Start small, within your risk appetite, and scale vertically, not horizontally. Build patterns and techniques that can be tailored to people's local context. And be very clear about what's no option, prescriptive activity. Find the small changes that are having a positive effect, and then focus on those actions to socialize those across the organization. And also focus on the things that increase people's survivability, okay? The things that give psychological safety from fear and loss, so that they can focus on improving their outcomes. Now, after the hero worship I've given to John, it wouldn't be right unless I ended with the same quote I started with. Impediments are not the blocker to value, they are the pathway to value. And the best way to describe this is, you know how happy a dog is when against all odds, she's found a way to get to that stick and to bring it back to you. She knew her desired outcome. She faced into her impediments and just kept trying with the resilience of a boxer. She relentlessly focused on getting that stick. And she had to be an active participant in that process. She wasn't a spectator. She was the climber we talked about. She found the simplest way to solve the problem. We didn't need to build a bridge across the lake to get to the sticks. She just needed to know how to swim to get across it. And she wanted the stick. She's excited about the stick. This was going to be fun. She was invited to participate by us, and she wanted to do it. She wasn't forced to do it. So the most important lesson here, if you like, the truth of all of these things from my failure, is just learn to be the dog. Thank you. Now, I believe we have a Q&A session, so I think you've got an opportunity to post questions in the chat if you want to ask any questions. Okay, I've had a question. Did you try transforming big companies? So I am actually a permanent employee of NatWest Group Financial Services. So we are a relatively large organization, about 50,000 employees, and we run about 400 programs, and we used to run about 3,000 change projects a year. So we've been going through, over the last 3 to 4 years, a massive transformation from a traditional kind of stage-gated project approach to change to a agile transformation in our delivery, not just in our change delivery, but in the way that we work as a bank across our run and change activity. And so what I'm describing here are not just my personal reflections, they are things that happened at NatWest Group that Katrina and I have kind of learned from and are sharing with you today. There's a second question. How did this transformation affect you as a coach? Well, all I can say to that is it's helped me build resilience. So every time you fail, you know, there's a sense of wanting to stop and give up. And I think the key thing for me was always saying that if we could make enough learning happen in small enough increments of learning, then we were within our risk appetite, and therefore we were able to reflect on the learnings, find a different way to get to the same outcome, and then from that experimentation find the right answers. And it's during that process that we discovered that one size doesn't fit all, and our leadership cultures, which are unique across the organization, all impact how quickly teams can become agile. And if you don't bring those leaders with you, then you just can't succeed in helping the teams to become agile. So personally, I think the key learning for me is it's taught me to be resilient to those failures, but also to embrace them, to create psychological safety for my team and I, so that we can continually learn and improve to help the bank be successful. We've had another question. What's the best practice you can adopt for agile transformation in the banking field? Well, that's kind of a hard one to answer. What I'm going to do is answer it slightly differently. So we discovered that when we talked about one size doesn't fit all, it's because we tried to apply a single agile methodology to replace a traditional methodology for the way of delivering change. And what we found was that in a local context, for some people, Scrum was the right answer. And for others, it was Kanban. And for others, it was extreme programming. And for still others, they just needed to visualize their work on a whiteboard somewhere because they didn't even know what things they had that they were working on. And the levels of maturity and the difference between maybe a technology team and a non-technology team meant that we couldn't apply one set of processes and techniques to everyone. So one of the things we learned was we have to rapidly provide different tools and different techniques that allow people in their local context to be successful. And I talked in my presentation about knowing the things that are prescriptive. So part of that was saying, well, there are some prescriptive things we do, let's say portfolio reporting to our bank governance bodies. Well, that's non-optional. We have to do that reporting on a monthly basis. So what data drives that? And how do I get that data? And how do I ensure that data is entered once and then reused many times in my reporting without preventing individual teams from working in the tools of their choice? And we didn't want tooling anarchy, so we made some decisions around choices, and we gave people 3 or 4 choices of the types of tools they could use for different things. So they had Jira, they had Plan View Lean Kit, they've got Mural, they've got Teams. So there's a number of tools that you can use for collaboration. So we didn't impose controls around tooling at the team level, but we did impose of activities at the portfolio level. And that enabled the teams to rapidly learn and experiment and fail and improve using processes that they defined themselves within the context of their agile maturity, whilst I was still able to retain the enterprise level governance and reporting that was needed for the whole portfolio. So this was an IT and business transformation. It's the entire bank that we're transforming in this way. It's transforming the technology organization. It's transforming the kind of central functions like audit and risk who are implementing second and third line of defense activity. And it's transforming our customer journey teams, the teams that are focused on providing new products and services to customers. And everything we used was not homemade. Okay, there's no homemade here. We have a huge purpose-driven reuse process. So we wanted to leverage existing high-quality frameworks. So we built what we called the idea to value framework, but we centered it around SAFE. So the Scaled Agile framework was the principal framework that underpinned it. But in the context of SAFE, we incorporated some elements of large-scale Scrum, and we incorporated, particularly at the team level, multiple different agile approaches within the context of that SAFE framework. So we might have a release train doing PI planning, but at a team level, a team could be doing Scrum because they're in technology, or the team could be doing Kanban because they're in the business, but they're still working to the same outcomes and the same quarterly cadence of PI planning. Sorry, I've spoken quite a lot there to answer questions. Katrina, was there anything you wanted to add in?
No, I'm just glad that you mentioned the point, because I think that it is business as well as IT, because I think obviously the IT element's the most common, but no, we are transforming across HR, L&D, learning and development, and it's really great to see that, and it makes working with these other departments so much easier when we're all talking the same language and working to the same cadence.
Thanks. That's all we've got time for today. So thank you for your time. I hope you learned something interesting from that, and I appreciate the questions. And I hope you have a lovely conference with what's left.
Thanks, everyone.